I'm ready to make some bets.
Well, have a good night. I'm speechless. Uh, you know, there's just some key things that I think, talking with a lot of people my age and younger, I believe we've come to the conclusion that I was lucky enough, and we were lucky enough. My brother Bruce is back there, and we were lucky to grow up in New York City. And the smallest part of New York City on Staten Island, it was still country. And yet we could get on a train and a ferry and be in downtown Broadway and 42nd Street in a matter of an hour and a half or less. And I could ride my horse. I did it deliberately twice. I rode it to school, at high school. First time I realized, oh crap, I forgot to ask Coach, can I tie him out in the field? And, but that's the kind of a place and a time where, born in World War II or before, just as World War II was breaking out, and my dad coming out of the Depression trying to find a job apparently, we grew up with close family on both sides, my dad's side and my mother's side. The grandparents we had were just terrific people. And one of the people that had an influence on me that everybody was tired of hearing his stories and nobody would sit and listen, but I as a kid did, to my great-grandfather. A guy who heard Wild Bill Hickok, I forget what the year was, it was coming to Staten Island. And he went and read that in the newspaper and took off and cut school and went there apparently from the stories we heard. And told Wild Bill, I'll work, mucking horses or whatever you need. I want to see this thing, and I'd like to be part of it. And as the family story goes, he took off with Wild Bill when Wild Bill left. And you know, the best I can guess, and Bruce may have a better read on it. He's been trying to pick up some of these stories, and we can document many of them, the family stories. Great-grandpa also getting frozen in the ice between Staten Island and New Jersey, with his crew. And he ran out of food there for a couple of days, so he just decided, well, I'll walk it. I would guess it was at least 8 to 10 miles across the sea ice to see if I can get help when they were frozen in. Because there were no steel ships, or very few steel ships coming in and out of the harbor. And that was one of the coldest winter that froze up not only the lower harbor, but the upper harbor. And so it took, from the story, a steel ship coming out of New Jersey to break through the ice to get to them. But in the meantime, Grandpa had already washed ashore. But he had some crew aboard. But you think about it, I had to go live with my grandmother when I was about, I guess I was about the first time 5 years old, less than 5 years old. I was just getting ready for kindergarten. And they lived up on the fifth floor of a big apartment house in St. George. And you could look out their windows and see the Statue of Liberty in Manhattan, and over here Bayonne, New Jersey, and the Navy Yards. And at that time, the ships were coming in and out of the Navy Yards all the time. And by the time I left them, my grandfather made me learn every one of the different types of tugboats there are, and how many different companies were running tugboats, and what ships did most tugboats. He had me studying tugboats at fifth kindergarten, And the point of all that is I also look out the window, and there are people in horse carts carrying big compartments of sheetrock. One of the biggest sheetrock plants was in St. George, down on the lower thing right near where all the railroad tracks were. And there are all these trucks, chain-driven trucks with hard tires, running back and forth. And there's the train, but the train's running on coal. So you see that, and at the same time, you hear Annalise saying, she's got an experiment on Mars probe. We have a lot of folks that some of us know who have been in space. And it's great-grandpa who had a babysit with me, the guy who ran away with Wild Bill. He came back. I don't know how he got his money. He probably gambled well. But when he came back, the story was he got dropped off out, Wild Bill cut off in California. And he rode a boxcars back, hoboing it, and then set up and bought property in Great Kills, right in the middle of town, and ended up building a house there, right near a place called Jack's Pond. And you heard something about Rosemary? Well, I had one of the larger paper routes on Staten Island I started when I was in 7th grade, delivering papers. And I'd, go down to the hardware store, they'd send these big bundles of papers. You cut open the bundle, and you had to fold them so you could throw them. And I had my bicycle, I had rigged so I could put a big bag on the front, a big bag on the back, and carry one bag on my back, and another smaller bag on my belly. And I just go zoom, zoom, zoom down these roads. And there's one road that went down to the beach, and the winds would blow there quite a bit. And so I had to fold the paper into either a triangle or a square about this big, make like a frisbee out of it. And then zing, zing, zing in there. And there's one house that had a porch, and you could sit back almost as far as the walkway in. And sometimes that would take off and end up on their roof of their porch. And I'd say, oh crap, And if I had an extra paper, I'd fold one and throw it, but more often than not, I'd just go. So I come back one day, and there's a ladder by when you collect your money on Saturdays. I go back, and there's a ladder going up the top of the roof. And there's a note on it that said, Bill, you check your money's where you throw the paper. But that's the kind of people you were working with. It was just some, lessons learned. My dad and my grandfather decided when I was 7th grader that I needed to learn a trade. My grandfather on that side, the son of the runaway, had worked his way up into major corporate positions. So they decided I ought to be, learn how to do something that I can make a living with after their experience in the Depression. So what did they have me do? They put me out with this old mason that's a bricklayer and a stonemason. And he volunteered to build fireplaces and the chimneys and foundations for all of the cottages and the grounds at the Pouch Scout Camp. So I spent 3 summers doing that work, mostly mixing cement, but I learned how to lay stone, I learned how to lay brick. And now that I just looked the other day, the largest green space in New York City is the Palace Scout Camp. And I don't know whether Fred Moon's still here. Yeah. Well, Fred is persistent. He always has been. To be able to, either that or he's got a very big bladder. I'm sorry, I left my track on that one. The camp there supplied most of the scout troops for all of New York City. They would come over on the ferry and go there. My mother started a den of Cub Scouts when we were, I guess we were about 6, just going into 7th grade. And I wondered why she did that. And I knew, you know, she was always, whatever she did, she was the leader. So many different organizations and community activities. But she did it because of two kids that were in our community and I hung around with. And one was Georgie Livingston. And Georgie's dad had been killed in World War II, and his mom was having a hard time. And Georgie was on his own an awful lot of the time. So he'd come over our house and spend time. But she recognized if she put all of us together, that Georgie would have a feeling of another place to go. And Georgie ended up being Alan Greenspan's #1 assistant. You know, because of that kind of experience, he was able to grow, and many others. But so did each one of us. So Grandpa's lesson, great-grandpa's lesson, in that garden he had in the back, when Grandma and great-grandma and my mother had to go shopping on Saturday mornings, he had a babysit with his toddler. So he'd take me out in the back and he'd roll over a rock and say, "Look at that." And I'd start pulling it. "What is that?" And he said, "Now I'm going to leave you here. And when I come back, I want you to tell me what you saw going on there. Who's doing what?" And he'd go over work in the garden until he saw me get antsy. But he also said, "You know, if you get tired, you can go anywhere you want. You can go over to Win Everham, you can go over to hear somebody else in the door, and between the pear tree and the edge of the garden, you go anywhere you want if you're going to take a break. But don't go out of it." Right? So what's that about? Freedom, but boundaries. So when we give kids experiences, we need to give them small boundaries. And as they become responsible and confident, we enlarge those boundaries. You know, and those are the kind of lessons. I just make up stories and you say, that sounds like a good one. How many legs did it have? What was it eating, you know? And that kind of notion of nurturing, while you're doing it, kind of a crummy task, to a kid who learned to admire that gentleman and listen to his stories almost to the day he died. And every time he told me a story, I learned something. And he said, "Bill, you know, I'm an old guy, but I've lived long, and I've learned a lot of things. So always listen to the elders." And I worked up in Alaska, and I worked up in northern Canada. The elders are the people you listen to. And when you listen to the elders, you get a whole different perspective. Now, some night, maybe I'm going to quit this, so you can go home and have an evening. Some of the evening left. But some night, maybe, the thing about the Monday group is it has traction. It was published in the book that Susie showed you. And the game commissions or wildlife agencies of all 50 states sponsored that program, Project Wild. So they put the money in. So every school in America got copies of that book. And also, I did a lot of work in Canada, particularly Toronto, British Columbia, and the North Territories. And they adopted the Monday group model. And then the Canadian Wildlife Federation said, "We don't want an American model." So I helped them develop one that was a Canadian model. And they have an action, civic engagement component in their program nationwide. The Canadians are a little different we are. When you start to talk to the elders are sacred out there. Because the Canadians, even though some of them were pretty greedy and were grabbing land, but the Canadians recognized the sacredness of land and the sacredness and the importance of the people whose culture relied on that land. You know, we exterminated the Plains Indians by killing the bison just to starve them. But the Canadians didn't do those kind of things. So there's a whole different relationship. And I learned so much. We were in high-end gift shop that does native carvings and silverworks, and I have my wedding ring is an eagle done by one of the most famous carvers in British Columbia. My wife gave me. And one of those elders that was in the shop one day was watching Rosemary and listening to their conversation. And he said, "Ma'am, your totem is the wolf." And I went, "Why the wolf?" And she kind of asked the same question. He said, "Because the wolf is the keeper of your family. The wolf is the keeper of your knowledge of family and protects the family. You guys go out and run around trying to find food, but mom's home taking care of things." And I learned so much from Rosemary, and I had the opportunity. I'll leave this in my last story, and then I want to just clarify a few points on the Monday group. And those will be short points, but two of them. But I almost forgot what story I'm telling. What's that?
Rosemary is the wolf.
And Rosemary, I'm beyond Rosemary is the wolf. She is. And she's been through a rough time, and she has that backbone. She and I started going together in high school, in our freshman years. And I saw on Jack's Pond, remember I mentioned my grandfather lived probably right near Jack's Pond? Well, we used to ice skate on there. And a bunch of guys were ice skating, pretending to play hockey. And I looked across the pond, and there was this girl skating back and forth, doing those arabesques and all those kind of things. Had a red and white cap on and everything, and I watched that for a while. And she fell down a number of times, but she could right up and go again. And it impressed me. And I asked one of the guys, "You know who that is?" And one of the guys says, "Yeah, it's Rosemary Golder." And he said, "I went on a date with her." And it just so happened that I ended up then buying up the paper route from him that Rosemary's house was on. You got to think ahead sometimes. I always know what train she was coming home from school, because she had to take a train to get home on Staten Island. And I'd just always be doing that paper route just about the time the train was emptying out, so I could kind of walk her home. And anyway, we had all that kind of thing. But the aspect of that togetherness and familyness and communityness. We wandered, and the average kid today, the research I've read recently, the average kid today, if they're in a true urban area, the majority of them are latchkey. They come home from school, they lock themselves in the house because mom and dad have to work, and they're there doing their thing on virtual materials. The average kid in a fairly urban neighborhood usually gets the edge of the property or to the end of the block. And I don't know about you folks, some of you probably had that home range like I did. I was a toddler and I knew 12 square blocks. In fact, the WPA guys, those invading Italians that were coming over, couldn't speak English, but they found me wandering out in the front yard with no diaper on. But they had been paying attention and they knew who this wandering kid belonged to. So one of these WPA guys knocks on the door and said that, "I think your child escaped." And that kind of cultural mix. Staten Island was not heavily multiracial. The black communities were on the northwest section of an urban area. The South Shore were mostly farmers and people that are just trying to get away from the crowd. And the North End is where most of the major urban type development took place. carried mail on probably 70% of all the mail routes by being a letter carrier during the holidays and during the summer. When vacations take place, they hire some temp who's stupid enough to walk all those miles and deliver mail. And I always tried to quit just before the first day of the month. And why would you want to do that? Because all the magazines are coming out tomorrow. You have to carry it around. What I'd suggest is maybe sometime, John Casati, a really nice program in this venue, where we brought Ralph Woodford back out. And to get Ralph to tell us stories about growing up out on Island and Sanibel, and a couple of the other long-term fishermen in the area. And they're the elders. And when you listen to them speak, you learn so much that you can, not only from my own place, now I know where to go get certain fish, but just to know how that process works. And the thing I learned from Grandma again, I was a young kid. I was probably third grade, second grade, third grade, I think it was. I'm walking through, we were playing out on the playground, this kid come by and he whacks me, went right outside the head. What was that? And so I went over and whacked him right back. And then we both got taken to the office. And when I got home, my grandmother was taking care of me at that time. She gave me heck about I had to be a more responsible person. And I said, and she said, by the way, why did he hit you? I said, I don't know. I wasn't doing anything. I was just walking by. Oh no, you did something. He didn't hit you for no reason. So your job is between tomorrow, by tomorrow afternoon, or no later than the day after, I want you to find out why he hit you. So I'm kind of embarrassed even thinking about that. So I did. The second day, I was walking around and he was near me and I said, hey, what did you get me the other day? He said, I just didn't like what you said and you got picked first before me. I said, well, I didn't pick. So why'd you pick on me? Well, the next thing you know, we're best friends, But she always said, when you have opponents, you go find out what their values are and what their interests are. Because they're not stupid. They're smart people too. And if you can understand their point of view, you can get so much further. And that's what we did. A couple of speakers mentioned Troutman in Cerro Bay. I fought like heck to stop Troutman. But on the other hand, Troutman came to our offices down at the Gwynn cafeteria and had cooked cake with us when we had birthday parties. He had this little red-haired secretary who would walk behind him and take down shorthand every word he said. It was his way of doing, advanced intelligence. Stupid people like some Joel Christensen. This was before Rick's time when we got more intelligent people on staff. Joel and I have taught together for years, and still one of my very best friends. But they get in, we had a cafeteria, big table, we'd sit there, but there was a wall, a bookcase between us. And next thing you know, the pictures on the wall would be moving. They'd move and then stop, move and stop. And I noticed Troutman watching that, trying to figure out what was going on. It was the guys inside. They put a magnet on both sides of the book. So this will create havoc. But right to the last day, I respected Mr. Troutman. He was in business to do business. And he was like my grandfather when I got to know him. He had kids, that he cared a lot about, and grandchildren he cared a lot about. But we agreed we can't agree. You have had the Kennedys on your side. They sent a destroyer down, and his interest down in South America would being threatened. That's how much lobbying power he had. But we went to a lawsuit, and Jim Beaver was part of that, as well as some of the other, but I don't know Wayne Daltrey's still here. Wayne was the Regional Planning Commission director, assistant director, and we all worked hard on the strategies to overcome. My mom and dad were in a club, a bridge club, and we got talking and found out, I said, is there an organization of homeowners associations? And they said no. So Mark, just lost his last name, one of the people in the bridge club was superintendent of schools in one of the big districts right outside of Philadelphia. He decided, well, I'm going to organize one. So he did. He organized an organization of homeowners associations. And they became a force because they could see when you put that many, a city the size of Fort Myers population, right on that bay, your taxes are going up. Just on the road projects alone, not to mention other infrastructure. And so all of a sudden we had thousands of people who were paying attention to what was going on. So what I started to do when I mentioned the John Cassani thing is that the Monday group has Rick mentioned some of the tenets, or I call them the commandments, so it sounded more official. I didn't want 10 commandments because that sounded like a copycat operation. So number one was treat everybody as a person of high moral respect, with high moral respect, because they value you. And if you treat them like a person of high moral behavior, they're likely to act that way. Before something, and my mother made me learn that one. When I was about a fourth grader, she made me read with her Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking. And that's always been part of how I look at the world. What can we do? What options are there? What do other people think? You know, and that's how you put together a strategy. And then the next one is do your homework. That's one they don't like. They say, well, what do you mean? I said, do your homework. And my criteria for that is you need to know more than any county commissioner. Take you about 20 minutes. Because they're not specialists. And you become a specialist on eagles, and you will know more than any county commissioner, except maybe Ray Judah. You know, and never have one option. Always look for multiple options. And always, you know, basically, the key thing for a teacher is my job is to help coach you process-wise. But your job is to decide what you want to do. What kind of thing in this community do you see that you'd like to change? Or in this school system. Rick Tully got a whole recycling program in the school system. We got a waste management program in the school system. We saved the school system. They documented millions of dollars. And they said, well, we can't do that because it's late, you know, the janitors can't have time to do it. I said, let the kids do it. So you put a monitor in every classroom. And their job in the last 5 minutes of school is to take trash out of that room and put it in the, you know, big central system. And give the kids responsibility. And you know what we found out? Research was, you know who loves to pick up litter the most in a school? Kindergarten kids. They loved it. You know, it's easy. They do it. And then you put the kindergarten kids in charge of trash in the cafeteria. And they go around when they see people throwing stuff around or leaving stuff. And the kindergarten kids take ownership of that. So the process is, and there's a whole model. I did my dissertation on this. You know, I've been lucky enough to go through cycles. When I was in college, I got fascinated with creativity. So I got hooked up with the leading creativity think tank out of the University of Buffalo. I started learning about the research on creativity and what the literature was. And that helped me kind of formulate ideas of how you stimulate creativity in playing. And then I got into, I always get into things like frogs. You know, that frog you gave me? You know, this frog got me in Cornell. This frog on my tie. Some of you might notice that they're mating there. Oh, you totally don't understand? Now I got you. Right? But my first week of teaching in this little country school in Moravia, New York, I had all the other teachers got to give me the kids that they selected when they made my classes up as a new teacher. So you guess who I got? And one of the groups came in, and the last period of the day, I had them general math and general science. And the way I dealt with them was, these kids are street smart. You know, they're all working on dairy farms and that kind of stuff. So I told them, I'll put this box up here in the front of the room. And every Friday afternoon, I'm going to pull 3 things out of that box. And you pull any question you have about anything, and I'll try and answer it. You know, well, that's naive of a brand new teacher. You know, sure enough, my box was pretty well full. And pull out the first one, and it's kind of a trivial thing, it was easy to answer. I get to the third one, is how do whales do it? So I said, you all seen cows and bulls do it. Just think about doing it in the water on a big skies. You know.
It seems like a bad place to end, Bill, but we're getting ready to pull the hook because we got cake out there.
Okay. But the one thing you cannot do ethically, and unfortunately I've seen it broken too many times, is give the kids a project that they may or may not have, that they have very little choice in. Every Monday group, every year, had to vote on multiple options they had for projects. And several of you mentioned that you were the 3rd year or the 4th year. But every year that meant that the class coming in, the juniors and seniors coming in, voted to continue that. Because the seniors from the last, juniors from the last course soldier on, right, usually. And so that's what built continuity. And it's not coerced. And a number of times we cut them off. And it's okay to take something to that point and then stop. You know, somebody else can pick it up, but you've made a contribution to moving it forward. So that proposal to follow John Cassani's really good model is if you want to do this kind of stuff once in a while, we have an evening where we take a look at a topic and we take on a problem we want to look at. You know, I've got all kinds of stuff, brain research that I got to know one of the best brain surgeons in the world who became a good friend because I just asked him questions. And another person with me asked the same questions when she was working on her doctorate. And he got fascinated with us. And so we got a friend all of a sudden who's the world expert, one of the world, he did, when Sperry got the Nobel Prize for hemispherectomy, he did 90% of Sperry's surgery. I've had gotten here presidents, you know, Porter Ross nominated me for the Teddy Roosevelt Award to give out in the White House. The Republicans had to have some conservationists. So they put this award together that each congressman could pick 2 people from their state. So I got picked by Porter. And a woman I'd worked with for years, who was 80, I think she was 88 at that time, 89. And she got picked, she's over in Palm Beach County. She was the first woman admitted to MIT. And I said, how'd you get in? Back in the 20s. How'd you get in? She said, well, I was a little called me Marty. So they didn't pick up on it. They admitted her. She's smart as could be in there. And she worked with us in Lee County. We did a book that we took from her program. She used to keep snippets. I said, what the hell's a snippet? You know what it means in animals. She said, no, when I see a good quote, see a good thing, take it out, put them in my snippet bag. So we started collecting snippets in the school system. And that produced a book on from authors that we used. Rosemary ended up having communications with Isaac Asimov, handwritten communications with Isaac. All kinds of things spin out. So
I think you've given us our assignment.
okay. And
Our assignment,
the main thing is I've exceeded my carrying capacity. I suspect many of you have too.
We have food left? We have cake
Well,
there?
you know, you look at these posters up here, there's so many initiatives going on around. That's one that brought a lot of us together.
and I think our main assignment is to carry this conversation on. One way is to add your snippets to the journal pages on the table out there, to add your snippets to our Facebook page, and to continue doing what you're doing. Thank you, Bill.
Bill wants one more thing to say, it's not on my way to do it.
As Mario says, you know, this guy got me now, and I'm floating through many things. But one of the things that came out of this is there is a legacy. When the shootings went on over in Palm Beach County at the high school over there, I had the police, the sheriff's department, and a number of organizations call and say, we heard about this Monday group thing you have. We want to get kids involved in that kind of thing. And we have many programs throughout the country that's one off. And I think if we can do what we started to do, Eric has put together, and John before is just nobody better at putting a documentary together. He got an Emmy for the one he did in the dump down in Brazil. If we can produce that story of the Nature Center relationship, and that was because we had an extra smart school board. Bobby Delisandro was the person who did the first guide for all our volunteers. But that board figured out how to help fund the Nature Center by saying, we can't give you money because every other not-for-profit want money. How about we rent space? And by paying a rental, that'll provide the funding. And that's the way things work when a community works together.
Find a way.
Find a way.
Share your story.
Thank you, Bill Hammond. Give Bill Hammond, everybody.
Yeah!
We love you, Bill. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for all of you who are speaking. Just a reminder, there is still food out there if you want to keep the conversation